Okay, so first I want to start off by introducing myself. My name is Shelby Everett, and I'm a political science student here at Troy University. With that being said, I chose George Washington as my great leader, so I'm excited to tell you guys a little bit about him. I want to start off with some background information. George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732, at his family's plantation on Pope's Creek in Westmoreland County in the British colony of Virginia, to Augustine Washington and his second wife, Mary Ball Washington. Few details about Washington's early education are known. Although children of prosperous families like his typically were taught at home by private tutors or attended private schools, it's believed he finished his formal education at the age of 15. As a teenager, Washington, who had shown an aptitude for mathematics, became a successful surveyor. His surveying expeditions into the Virginia wilderness earned him enough money to begin acquiring land of his own. After Washington's half-brother Lawrence died in 1752, Washington eventually inherited Lawrence's estate, Mount Vernon, on the Potomac River near Alexandria, Virginia. In December of 1752, Washington, who had no previous military experience, was made a commander of the Virginia militia. He saw action in the French and Indian War and was eventually put in charge of Virginia's militia forces. By 1759, Washington had resigned his commission, returned to Mount Vernon, and was elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses, where he served until 1774. In January of 1759, he married Martha Custis, a wealthy widow with 2 children. Washington became a devoted stepfather to the children. He and Martha never had any children of their own. In the ensuing years, Washington expanded Mount Vernon from 2,000 acres to 8,000 acres with 5 farms. By the late 1760s, Washington had experienced firsthand the effects of rising taxes imposed on American colonists by the British, and came to believe that it was the best interest of the colonists to declare independence from England. Washington served as a delegate to the First Continental Congress in 1774 in Philadelphia. By the time the Second Continental Congress convened a year later, the American Revolution had begun in earnest, and Washington was named Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. In 1783, with a peace treaty signed between Great Britain and the U.S., Washington, believing he had done his duty, gave up his command of the army and returned to Mount Vernon, intent on resuming his life as a gentleman farmer and family man. However, in 1787, he was asked to attend the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia and head the committee to draft the new Constitution. His impressive leadership there convinced the delegates that he was by far the most qualified man to become the nation's first president. At first, Washington balked. He wanted to at last return to a quiet life at home and leave governing the new nation to others. But public opinion was so strong that eventually he gave in. The first presidential election was held on January 7th of 1789, and Washington won heatily. John Adams, who received the second largest number of votes, became the nation's first vice president. The 57-year-old Washington was inaugurated on April 30th, 1789 in New York City. Because Washington, D.C., America's future capital city, wasn't built yet, he lived in between New York and Philadelphia. So next I want to get a little bit into Washington's personality. So I'm going to start with a quote that was said about Washington. The character of George Washington will be transmitted to prosperity, and the memory of his virtues, while patriotism and virtue are held sacred among men, will remain undiminished. Washington's personality was embellished by no false and tinsel ornaments, and was incapable of change from the varying accidents of manners or opinions in times. So basically, Washington was a genuine guy. He didn't let anything sway his opinion. Washington believed that external appearance should reflect inner merit. He possessed a tall, commanding physical presence that warranted development of grace and public humility. Although Washington was actually 6 feet tall, he often told people he was only 6 foot. He was actually 6'3" and a half inches tall. He could be excitable and demonstrated impatience during early campaigns, but learned to channel strong passions through carefully cultivated deportment. Washington strategically hid his strong ambitions, demonstrated by his methodical study of political systems, world affairs, and competitive intelligence that might undermine the notion that he was anything but a reluctant politician. He refused to take a salary for public service, only applying to Congress to be reimbursed for expenses. That's something that I think is pretty noble as far as the president goes. Prudence in industry, exemplified by Washington, became the ideal for masculine deportment and female virtue during the early republic. Washington demonstrated his quiet acumen for current affairs by remembering faces and names of guests and exchanging a few cordial words with each visitor. Washington read around 10 newspapers each evening and accumulated a library of around 900 volumes. His ability to mask his interest to appear disinterested came to exemplify the perfect balance of moderation and detachment admired by later leaders during tumultuous times. Okay, so next I want to get into why Washington is a good leader or a great leader. First of all, he believed in his men. He was a man of exemplary character. He treated others with the utmost respect. He held his men accountable. He loved his men. He placed the welfare of his men ahead of his own. He was personally invested in the cause. He did not waver from his guiding principles. He was a man of deep faith who demonstrated that through his actions. He took his responsibilities very seriously. So Washington's leadership style is what I'm going to get into next. Washington obviously displays democratic leadership to some extent because in a way he is the father of American democracy. In another aspect, Washington can be described as a visionary leader. The visionary leader, first of all, has very clear, encompassing, and far-reaching vision in regard to the cause of an organization. The visionary leader is skillful in designing and creating an organizational culture, which will make possible the attainment of the leader's visions and ideas. The visionary leader is also a person who can attract others to follow him or her in seeking attainment of the vision. Of all the founding fathers, George Washington alone demonstrated fully and the threefold characteristics of a visionary leader: the intellectual and moral capacity over a long period of time and in the course of manifold difficulties to maintain coherency between long-range ideas and goals and short-term actions. From this, we can assert that George Washington was America's supreme genius in leadership, and thus that's how he became the father of our country. As far as leadership qualities go, he possessed the powers of persuasion. He had an ability to unify, and he had an ability to empower others. And so now I just want to kind of close with George Washington's accomplishments. He was the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army during the American Revolution. He led the U.S. to victory in the decisive land battle of the American Revolutionary War. Washington didn't seize power due to his American republicanism. George Washington became the first president of the United States in 1789. George Washington established many forms of government that are still in use today. He suppressed the Whiskey Rebellion. Through Jay's Treaty, Washington created a strong relationship with Britain. He issued the Proclamation of Neutrality to protect the U.S. from war in Europe. Washington established the United States Navy. His farewell address was one of the most important documents in American history. And so now I'm going to just end with a quote by George Washington that kind of exemplifies what a good leader he was and how intelligent he was. We should not look back unless it is to derive useful lessons from past errors and for the purpose of profiting by dearly bought experience. Thank you so much for listening, and this concludes my briefing.